Welcome to ART,
the Adventure Race Training Podcast.
I'm Nick Herf.
And I'm Jason Magnus.
And with years of coaching experience and formal education in human performance, we've helped numerous athletes to achieve their goals and increase their self-efficacy. My background comes from formal graduate level education, coaching a variety of collegiate teams and professional endurance athletes. My athletes range from everyday racers to NCAA All-Americans and multiple world record holders.
And I'm the captain of Team Bend Racing. I've devoted the past 2.5 decades of my life to adventure racing, competing at the top level for over a decade. But I draw a lot of my coaching and training philosophy on my years as a top-level climbing, acrobatics, and highlining coach, essentially trying to minimize the learning curve on notoriously difficult sports. I've also coached a few world champions, so together, Nick and I have some great successes.
Ultimately, we're here to share our knowledge and expertise with the community to help you prepare for your next big race. Our goal is that these conversations provide valuable insights to elevate your adventure.
All right, let's get started.
Today's guest is none other than the AR famous Daniel Staudigel from Team Bend Racing. Dan has raced all over the world for the past 2 decades, including a relentless streak of world championship appearances in Spain, Paraguay, South Africa, and Ecuador, culminating in an incredible 5th place finish just weeks ago at the 2025 AR World Championship in Canada. Despite his world-famous bonk, as seen by many on Eco Challenge Fiji, those who have actually seen Dan on the race course can attest that he's extremely strong, very fast, and also a bit funny. I've personally seen Dan running through the woods, where he appears to be flying like a mix between Bigfoot and a cross-country runner. Today, we're diving into Dan's background as a world-class long-distance paddler who has dedicated significant time to honing his craft. That expertise has been on full display with wins including the Washington 360, a 360-mile paddle race, as well as the historic performance at the Yukon 1000, the world's longest paddle race, 1,000 miles long. Not only did Dan and Jason set the world record in 2022, for the Yukon 1000, they absolutely crushed it, breaking the previous 13-year-old record by over 14 hours. So sit back and get ready to hear us deep dive into paddling. And bonus points if you're listening to this while training on the water. All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. We have Daniel from Team Bend Racing here, as well as Jason and myself. And Dan is going to give us a masterclass on all things paddling.
Masterclass? That sounds awesome.
I was going to give the master class because, I was part of the team with Dan that set all these records. But the reality is it's probably mostly Dan. And I also, by bringing Dan on, I can give you the responsibility if people are like, oh my God, that was the worst advice I ever got. I can just be like, oh, we just bring the experts on and I don't know anything about paddling. So, but
I think you don't take very much credit.
That's what I like to do. I like that.
I guess we'll find out, right? Like if Chelsea and I do terribly in the Yukon, we'll know that you were doing the Lord's work.
Dan has been my teammate for forever since he was in high school, literally in high school. Yep. And most recently, Dan and I paddled the Yukon 1000, which is the world's longest continuous paddle race, I think, or world longest.
I don't think it's the continuous. It's the longest. The continuous, it's not continuous because you sleep every night.
Right. Yeah.
The MR 640 is the longest continuous one or something like that.
But Dan and I paddled that a couple years ago and broke the longstanding world record on that thing and have a bunch of other big paddling wins together. And Dan is going back to repeat that race with my wife, Chelsea. So it is a good litmus test. If they're significantly slower than us, I can be like, yeah, man, it was all my extra power.
Exactly.
Or we can just think that it's Chelsea's being stronger than me too. So Dan and I chose to do a long time ago, and Chelsea and much of our team is to focus on paddling. And Dan has even taken more of that on than I have. And I'm wondering what your experience was, Dan. Like, what were some of the early times as an adventure racer where you started to think maybe paddling is something to actually invest a significant amount of time in? Because many adventure racers don't. Like, it's the rest discipline. They sit in the boat, you have a paddle, you know how to make it move forward, and you think that's as good as it gets. So what were your nexus points?
Well, I think the oldest one is the infamous Baja Travesía. I think it was the second edition of it, where there was a huge ocean traverse, and me and two of my freshly out of high school friends did this, and we were the only team that wasn't in a triple that made it. And that was purely a youthful idiocy that made that happen. It was not like technique. It was not anything other than like, surely this is a good idea. The adults told us that it's safe. And so we went and did it. And then we heard about all of the carnage that happened after the fact. And we just happened to make it. And we recovered from some nasty flips and all that stuff. But it was pretty obvious, like the difference between a great paddling team in a triple in that race and a mediocre paddling team with a fair amount of grit, which is what we were. And that was one of the first races where it's like obvious that it can make the difference, because just made a huge difference. And then I think we had a couple of other races where we realized that triples were great, and then we just dominated in a triple boat. And then you just start seeing the races where it actually makes a difference. And so there were a couple in California, and I think Patagonia also had some really decisive paddling moments.
For me, I remember being with you in a race. I think it was early in our career, and we were racing the infamous Dart Noon. For those of you that are newer to events racing, Dart Noon was kind of like, like I'm really proud of what Bend Racing has become, but in the day, that was what Dart Noon was. Dart Noon was the dominant U.S. team anywhere in the U.S. across the international circuit. They often took first and second. They kind of were the roadmap for having this big team that raced a lot and shared their secrets and protocols. And I remember being in a race against Dart Noon, and we had been lucky and we were getting faster, and we were ahead of them at one point, and then we got on this paddle leg. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Mary Chandler,
It just flew away.
Ryan Van Gorder, and maybe Sean Clancy were the guy in this triple, and they were relaxed and paddling so lazy and not putting out any effort, and they blew by us like we were standing still. And I remember having that moment. I was like, man, like, oh, they have a better boat. And then we started to get better boats, and then we realized they were still faster than us. And so that was my first time of like, oh, maybe we should actually see what this is like, or talk to somebody that is a paddler.
So that's when we went to the kayak club in San Diego.
Yeah. Nick, my question to you is like, how, you coach a lot of athletes, adventure racing. How many adventure racing athletes do you think would say that paddling is their strongest? Well, there's a long pause. Nick is doing calculations.
20%.
20%.
And
Really that high?
Yeah, I'm thinking of people I've raced with recently, and there's two that they used to be paddlers doing big whitewater or guides and things like that. And I would say, I'm thinking of two guys off the top of my head. I'm assuming I raced with about 10 people in the last 2 years. So I'm going to just go based on that. But if you think about, those are also people I'm mostly doing expeditions with. So it's probably less if we start to consider the general population, people doing 12 hours and below who may not come from as big mountain sport backgrounds.
And I think in some of the races, it does honestly matter less if these are short kind of paddling legs and you don't have that time. And I would also argue that we should be having a little bit of a discussion. Whitewater paddling skill does not translate to endurance adventure racing paddling at all. Like, I've met really talented whitewater paddlers, and you ask them to paddle flatwater for an hour, and they're doing all the things that you just look at and be like, yep, that is not going to help you go faster or use less energy, right? Because a lot of whitewater paddle is about instant power, maneuverability, body position, all those things. So, to me, it's kind of like the difference between a downhill mountain biker and a, gravel, 200-mile endurance racer, right? Whereas the downhill mountain biker, it's all about skill, body position, momentary movements, faith-based decisions where you're just going for it. Whereas, when you're kayaking and double for 7 hours like we did in World Championships in a pack raft, for God's sake, there's nothing exciting about that, unless you make it. So Dan, give us a little bit about your history of becoming a good paddler?
I think that the history very much started with going to the paddle club in San Diego with Chris Barlow, and now a constellation of great coaches. He kind of lit the fire under us. He put us in kid focused K1s and watched us flip, and then put us in little mini sprint races against 8-year-olds, and we got our butts handed to us. And so that really inspired us to see how much headroom there was. Like, if there's an 8-year-old that can just like crush me, that's not a good sign, right? And it is very informative. It's handy to know that there is a huge amount of growth, and it's nice to know it can get so much faster. This is great, but it is also a little embarrassing.
Well,
So we kind of,
I remember the first time we were out there with the kids, right? And because we were adults, we could crush them to a point based on sheer power and bad mechanics. But like if we were doing 1,000-meter set, we would pull ahead in the first 2, 3, 4, 500 meters, and then you'd be burning at as hard as you could paddle, and you just slowly toward the last couple hundred meters, these 8-year-olds would just pass you, not with their tiny little skinny arms, like skinniest little tiny arms. And I'm like, how is it possible for this to happen? And it happened over and over again. And so, yeah.
yeah, so that was really phase one, is like getting some formal training. And then we started putting it into practice in our expedition races and seeing great results, like being able to pull away or consistently have better paddling times. And then the final phase is like doing the ultra distance stuff with you, Jason, where the distances go from 8 hours being a long paddle to 8 hours being, we're just getting warmed up. So that's where we're at now, is like, so a full day of paddling is just the first quarter of the race.
Can you explain what a K1 is, and also kind of maybe explain to some of the newer racers what we're looking at with paddling? You know, is it canoeing, kayaking, kind of what does it
Sure,
look like?
yeah. A K1 is, well, it's technically just any kayak with one person in it, but it's mostly referring to a special kind of kayak that is for Olympics. It's like an Olympic grade kayak, and it's very narrow, shorter than you expect, very tippy, very light, and unbelievably fast. Fast on a whole other level. It feels, sitting in a K1 feels like you're sitting on a knife on its edge in the water, and you can just rip through the water so fast. It's very cool and very hard. Right? Balancing on top of a knife is not easy. But that's a K1. Paddling in races winds up being very, very, very many different kinds of things. And that's one of the things that Jason and I talk about a lot, is that there is this underlying thread of, how do I efficiently move through water, and how does it feel? And so paddling could be in a canoe. It could be in a sit on top kayak. It could be in a decent ocean kayak. It could be in a hard shell. It could be in an inflatable. There have been paddling legs where we're in essentially like dinghies, and so it takes a huge range of things. And at the bottom of it is like, how do I transfer power into water using a paddle usually? And that is kind of the thing that we have gotten pretty good at. We went into the world's toughest race, the Eco Challenge Fiji, with less than a year of time in a outrigger canoe. And those were the stages where we made up the most time on the entire field.
It's literally the only time that we've been significantly ahead of Nathan, Sophie, Stuart Lynch, and Chris Forn. Like, while they were racing hard, we were able to race hard and stay ahead of them and gain time on them. An OC, the outrigger canoe, wouldn't have been as effective, except that we had these years of paddle training. So we knew in our body, in our hands, through the vibration, through the shaft, what a clean, good, powerful paddle stroke felt like. And so given the instruction, the limited instruction that we had, we were able to really take that and train effectively in that, not just to keep the boat moving forward, but to maximize its speed, right? I want to get your opinion on, Dan, is one of the biggest aha moments for me, which may be hard for a lot of people to implement, but it's worth it when you get a chance, is experiencing what it's like to be in a fast boat, a boat that is designed for racing. Because one of the joys of that is if you can train or get coached in a fast boat, micro changes in your technique are feelable, right? When you're in a pack raft or in a sit on top kayak, those micro changes are not really feelable in a training. You need them if you want to race a sit on top kayak super fast. Clearly, a team like Seagate or Avaya always wins those legs, even in a sit on top kayaks. But you can't really feel it. You hit that hull speed, and you're just like, this is the speed of the boat. So if you don't train, if you only train in a slow, tank, then you don't actually understand what these differences are.
And just from a experiential perspective, for us racing this last Worlds, we're racing against a bunch of other top 10 teams on that water section. And we passed 5 or 6 teams. And the time that it took between seeing them at the edge of what we can see to passing them to them being long gone is like an hour and a half. And so it's like you see a team and you're like, I'm going to reel those suckers in. And you paddle your ass off. And then 45 minutes later, you're passing them. Maybe an hour later, you're passing them. And then 30 minutes later, you've totally forgotten about them. And it's like so slow, right? It's so different than biking or running or whatever, where if the team is going faster or slower than you, the pass happens and the whole thing takes 10 minutes. And so being in a fast boat makes it so that you can actually feel like the difference is noticeable, because it's the difference between 10 miles an hour or 10K an hour and 14K an hour. Whereas in a pack raft, it's the difference between 7K an hour and 7.5K an hour.
Which you can't really feel. Yeah. So that I think is an important thing for athletes that may want to not just survive the paddle stages, but be able to gain on them, is when you have an opportunity, go to a club, find a coach. You don't have to buy that boat. Like for a long time, we did not have a nice boat. We just went to the San Diego Canoe and Kayak Club, and they had boats when you would do coaching sessions, so we could get in fast boats. And, I know New York and the East Coast has a pretty robust canoe racing association and surf ski. So if you haven't taken the time to learn or to experience a surf ski, you can still get a boat that responds to your input in a feelable way, like in a tangible way, as opposed to a pack raft or a sit on top kayak.
I'm sure there's other equivalents, but the Epic V8 and V7s are just unbelievable boats in terms of a balance between being very stable for beginners, but also being very responsive. The difference between a V8 being pushed by me at absolute maximum and a V14 level thing is not actually that big of a difference. Like, they are very fast boats.
Yeah, I have an Epic myself. I got it off Dave Ashley's, and it's phenomenal for training on, and they're light, so it's not as bad to load it up and take it somewhere.
Exactly.
Okay, so Nick, do you use a wing blade?
Yes. Yeah, so I have both a wing blade, like carbon wing blade, and then I have, 2 or 3 different that are a mix of all plastic, or, more for like whitewater or things that I want to get beat up that might be carbon shaft with, plastic tips. But yeah, I do have a full carbon wing blade as well.
So my question to both of you is, I find a lot of people out there end up adventure racing with a wing blade without even really knowing why or when it's appropriate. They just see top teams using wing blade, or somebody said a wing blade is faster. Dan, can you know some of the physics and the dynamics behind it? Like in your mind, when is a wing blade the right choice, and when is it misappropriated in an adventure racing scene?
I think a wing blade really shines when you know what you're doing with it and you're in good conditions, like flat, like not wavy, disturbed white water. And so on a pool, like in an Olympic pool, is like the most amazing, perfect time to have a wing blade. And struggling through an absolutely awful ocean storm or going down whitewater, it's an absolutely atrocious choice. And there are wing blades that are better than others when it's like not pancake perfect flat, but all wing blades are like geared for like flat surface of the water or like ocean swell kind of thing. They can be quite good at, but really like textured stormy is very difficult make them sing in the way that they're designed. And so when we pick a paddle for a race, we're often judging how much time is it going to be pancake flat and beautiful, and how much is it going to be whitewater, stormy mess, etc. And then I routinely bring flat blades to expedition races for that reason.
Can you explain for everybody, what does a wing blade look like for some of the newer racers?
Oh, that's a great question. A wing blade it looks like it has spoons on the end. It's like cupped, wing-shaped blades as opposed to like flat, sections of plastic or carbon.
Yeah, you literally could scoop water and hold it inside of it if you want. So not just like, oh, there's a little curve. It's significant. You could use it to bail your canoe if you wanted.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And just, without getting too much into the physics, can you, just give a super layman's reason why wing blades give you a little bit of extra speed, all things told, if they're handled correctly versus a flat blade?
There's two things that wing blades do that are worth paying the money for. For endurance paddling, the difference is that they travel sideways through the water, which translates basically to that you get more water to push off of cleanly, if that makes sense. So when you're pushing water in order to move, you want to push the water back as opposed to pushing the water out of the way, if that makes sense. So when you stick a canoe paddle halfway in the water and you pull it back, you create swirls in the water that are very visible on the surface. And that is lost energy, right? You want to be pushing the water. You don't want to be swirling the water. And so every paddle stroke, you're playing the edge between the necessary amount of swirl and how much water are you actually just like grabbing and shoving. And wing blades let you travel horizontally through the water and act like a wing, essentially. And you just can touch more water in a paddle stroke without it becoming disturbed. So you can just put in more, it's easier to touch more water with the blade. That's what happens to expedition or in longer distance. They also have a different catch. So as you're putting the blade in the water, wing blades are designed to be good at immediately pushing on the water or pulling on the water. So as you're putting a wing blade in the water, you can be generating forward propulsion. If you try to do that with a flat blade, you will create huge swirls and you'll waste a ton of energy. So the most efficient flat blade stroke, you bury the blade in the water and then you yank on it. And if you try to yank too early, you suck air down there, you make all kinds of swirls, it's no good. With a wing blade, you can hit the water powerfully, immediately, and generate power the whole stroke.
As the blade is moving into the water, yeah.
As the blade is going into the water, and as the blade is going through the water, you touch more water, right? And so in that, like, you can kind of see why it makes a difference of how flat the water is, because that's one of the variables that you're kind of dealing with, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. And it is, the thing that people should know when they're choosing a paddle is that if you're not going to train paddling, get a flat blade.
100%.
Like
get a nice flat,
get an ultra light so that you don't fatigue your shoulders and your arms, which you shouldn't fatigue anyway. But if you're not getting paddle training, you're going to fatigue your shoulders and arms more than anything. So get a nice light blade, and that's the best thing you can do for yourself. But if you want to invest in a wing blade, you should also be willing to invest in some coaching. Even if it's just YouTube, it's better than nothing, right? And practice, because it is a remarkable thing. There's still these moments where you're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm not doing anything, and we are flying through the water because everything is just in sync, right?
That's when your buddy is working harder than you. I think that's what happens.
Fair.
I think
no.
when I feel that, I know you're working really hard. And when you feel that, I'm working really hard.
It happens to a point even in a solo boat. Like there are moments when you're just up to whole speed and you're at glide and you're like, you're putting in effort, but you're not, it's a sustainable effort. It's almost like we have those times on the bike when we're in the magic gear on the, on a, 2% grade and we're just like, I'm flying, right?
And if we're going to be in a canoe, absolutely have to have a flat blade in the back. If it's me, right? If I'm steering a canoe, I hate very few things more than trying to steer a canoe with a wing blade. So but wing in the front of the canoe is great.
Yeah, especially if the conditions are good, right? And generally on a canoe, you're not doing a lot of whitewater, right? So, it's also worth noting that wings tend to be more expensive, so that when you
Very.
break them because you're paddling them in shallow whitewater for 25 miles, or I think the worst for us was the Ecuador World Championships in 2014. They sent us down class 4 whitewater in a sit-on-top kayak. And yes, it was adventurous, but no, it was not racing. It was survival.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody flipped. And there's a class 4 rapid, and not a single boat made it through that without flipping out of the entire World Championships. And so many paddles. I think the total tally was something over 30 paddles broken in that race.
That's $15,000 worth of wing blades.
Right. And it was just like, yeah, what's going on? I remember one of the first things that we had to figure out was we had this wonderful Olympic coach, right? And he's telling us all these things, but he didn't really understand adventure racing. So we had to keep taking the information we were getting from him about how to go really fast for 1 kilometer, literally, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
how do we translate that to paddling a freaking sit-on-top kayak or a canoe or some, adventure racing is pretty famous for making you paddle boats that suck to paddle. I mean, let's just be honest, right? I love pack rafting. I'll raise my hand. Nick, you better say you love pack rafting or the podcast is over. Say somebody starts to get paddle training. Like, how should they be adapting some of this stuff to adventure racing?
I think that the interesting thing with adventure racing is that a lot of the finer points you just literally can't do. So one of the things that they'll talk about is reaching far forward and close to the boat. And so in a K1, the boat is less than a foot wide. And so that means something very different than reaching in close to the boat on a pack raft in the back, right? So trying to get too into the specifics of the advice that you get for good paddling can be really challenging when you're talking about translating it into a barge, essentially, right? And I think that the translation game for us has kind of turned into paddle far forward, close to the boat, like pull not too far back. That's kind of the limit and pull with your abs and not with your biceps or whatever is like basically the TLDR of 10 years of paddle coaching. And I think that the thing that people kind of don't spend enough time lingering on, I think, is figuring out where they're sore and what metrics they should look for that tell them that they're doing better or worse. Because I think that coaching and training without things that you're watching month over month or year over year is pretty useless. So like we have the FTP number for cycling. We have your mile time or your marathon time or whatever are the really common metrics that we get for other things. And I think that people kind of struggle finding metrics for paddling. And so I think that having a metric like, what's my heart rate paddling my boat at 10K per hour or whatever, right? Like figure out some metric that you can actually keep track of over time makes a lot of sense and is another piece of the puzzle that comes from the serious coaching practice and is one that is more applicable than how fast can you paddle a K1 100 meters, which is a cool number, but it's I don't have a K1. Neighbor has a K1, so I finally get to paddle it occasionally.
Nick, let's see if you're doing this. What is your paddling speeds in your boat?
Yeah, I know we're sitting at around 6 to 8K per hour typically in our pack rafts.
Yep. But what about in your, so this is just a good opportunity. So if you were to invest Nick Herf wants to get better at paddling, right? So, step one would be on a nice day, go out in you have a V8. What do you have?
Yeah, I think it's a V8.
A V8, go out in a V8, take your Garmin and somehow attach it to where your feet go. so you can see it, not on your wrist, and do a set. Do 3 sets that day. Let's call it 1,000 meters. Marks, it doesn't matter really what the distance is, but just make it consistent. And then like paddle out there at a moderate pace, see what your speed is. Oh, then do a bump set. And so you start to get a baseline for when I'm putting in this much effort, this is my speed, right?
Love
And
it.
then one of the really important things to start to recognize as an endurance paddler is if I say, okay, I'm going to do a sprint set and I push really hard for that 1,000 meters and I feel like, oh my God, I'm working and my speed only goes up by 2K an hour, it's not worth it, right? If I'm looking at, wow, I was at a threshold that I could not maintain for a long time and all I gained was 2 kilometers or 0.2 kilometers an hour, right? So you can start to play with these things once you know your baseline speed. Then you can say, okay, what if I get a little more reach? No extra effort. I'm just focusing on reach. And all of a sudden your boat goes a K an hour faster. Granted, you're not going to get K an hour faster on your pack raft, but you start to realize as a paddler what things are making the needle move towards faster or greater efficiency. Because what most people do when they paddle is they think the way to go faster is to put in more effort. And I think the biggest unlock with paddling is that is not true. Like we've gone out and done these tests where we will paddle our pack raft and we will feel like we are flying. And then we look at the data and we're like, actually, we were going the same speed when we were talking, listening to music and taking drink breaks all the time. Right. And so like, why would we do that? But if you don't have that experience in training, you're certainly not going to make the right decisions when you're racing. Right.
Unless you're paddle racing and you have a GPS. Because that was one of the big unlocks for us, is racing with the GPS in races where that's not just permitted, it's basically required, and being able to have that instantaneous feedback of how fast you're going in relation to how much you're putting in, heart rate or just rate of perceived exertion or whatever, is such a massive thing. And I think that there are so many little variables that you can tweak about your paddle stroke, where you exit, where you enter, how you rotate, how you move your arms, how you like twist your lower body. There's just so many variables and they all matter. And the trick is, how do you know what the outcome is for making some tweak or other? And the number of times where I'm paddling with somebody and I can just hear that they're wasting energy. I can be in the front of the boat and I can just hear that they're making the wrong noise with their paddle. And it's like, no, you're overdrawing. Like, just pull the paddle out earlier. And then we go faster with less effort because they were inadvertently dragging us back with every paddle stroke, thinking that they were helping us.
Can you explain that a little more details? Basic paddle mechanics and maybe the paddle entering the water versus coming out and kind of some of that drag you're talking about?
The paddle phases are the catch, the pull, and the release. There's probably a better word than a release. I don't
They use that
remember.
in a lot of the studies.
But if you pull the paddle too far back, it, instead of pushing water back, it pushes water forward. And it's hard to feel the difference. Yeah. And it's hard to feel the difference in your hands until you're very attuned to it. But if you pull the paddle too far back, it's actually like suctioning you the wrong way, essentially. And so just having a shorter paddle stroke, like pulling your blade less far through the water, just is less effort, one, and you just go faster. And so that is one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they try to go fast, is they just pull too far, thinking that they're like, oh, I'll put in more power or whatever. And I think that that's kind of the gist of it, that for sprint pace, how much power you put in at the very beginning matters. For regular endurance, just keeping your paddle stroke short is really the thing that makes the biggest difference. And the way to tell is to paddle with intentionally shorter paddle strokes and see what your speed does at a given heart rate. You will often find that you're just like sitting along at a 125 or a 130 or a whatever. You shorten your paddle stroke, your heart rate goes down and you stay the same speed, or your heart rate stays the same and you go faster. And then
And that's where
sweet.
we see also increase in cadence can increase overall speed.
I think that that's true in a K1. Like if you watch people in a K1 in the Olympics, they have a ridiculously high cadence. And I think the thing that I have seen personally is that cadence is a function of how fast your boat is moving. So you have to move your paddle backwards relative to you at the speed that you are in the water, like just mechanically, right? In order to push the boat forward, that's just physically what has to happen. And so if your boat is moving at 3K per hour, your paddle, like to deliver any power, has to be moving backward at 3K per hour. And if you're going 15K per hour, it has to be moving backwards at 15K per hour. And so when you're moving fast through in a fast boat, you need a high cadence just literally in order to move the paddle through the water fast enough to push you at that speed. And I think that when I see, like, every single team that we passed in Worlds had a faster cadence than we did by a not small amount. And the number one cue that I give people when I'm paddling with them is slow your cadence down. Because almost always we're in some shit boat that doesn't go very fast. It's like, call me when we're in a K1 and we can sprint this sucker out and it'll be awesome. But right now we're in a canoe and our top speed is 8K per hour. So your cadence is like 30 to 32. It's like, sorry.
And the thing that helps with, there's a couple reasons for this. The other reason is faster cadences tend to be shittier form,
Yep.
right? Like
Yes.
if our focus is on a fast
Yes.
cadence, as we
Yes.
get more skilled, and when Dan and I get together, if we increase our cadence, we usually get benefits from that, right? If we're staying on point, but we can't do that indefinitely. So it's easier for us to think about the things we know are more important. I tend to speed up my cadence because it makes me feel powerful, right? When I'm in the front of the boat, like it just happens, especially if the good song comes on or whatever. But there is this thing that we can only think about so many things as we're learning at a time. And we don't want to go too slow on the cadence, but we want to find this medium where it almost feels like we've matched our speed. And there are exceptions, right? Like there are times when the conditions are really bad, like on the last canoe leg in Canada for us was almost immovable. Like it was such a big headwind and waves that at times, as we started to get really pushed back, the only way to increase our speed enough to make, 0.5 kilometers an hour headway was a super high cadence, right? Basically every second that the paddle, and it was less about the cadence of, how many strokes we're taking. It's the least amount of time our paddles are not in the water, the better. So it's like we were just so fast in that return because every second that our paddle is out of the water, like we have no connection to it and we're going backwards, right?
Well, and it is different for canoes and kayaks because kayaks, you just get twice as many strokes for a given amount of body movement. And so for a canoe, double time is a thing. In a kayak, I haven't ever experienced that being a positive thing.
You're getting, even a moderate cadence in a kayak with a good blade is 30, 35, and that's per side. So you're looking at 70 paddle strokes every minute, right? That's a paddle being in the water a lot.
Yeah. And Dan, you're referring to with the canoe when you're in a canoe with canoe paddles, right? With the double
Yes.
time. Yeah.
Yes.
Like we were in camp.
Like we were at World. Yeah.
The other thing with canoes is that you don't have a rudder. And so double time also is a necessary tool if you need to make an absolutely gigantic course, like steering correction, right? Like when we were in Worlds, we're being pushed by a massive headwind. And me and Chelsea have a very awkward balance of weight in the boat that we just glide terribly. And she's so far out of the water and I'm so far in the water that the boat just wants to push very hard if we're not aiming right into the wind. And so for me, it's like, well, we don't really have many tools here. Like I just need to put a ton of energy in because there's not a different solution to this thing. Whereas in a kayak, your blade is in the water more. You can do much more authoritative steering continuously with a rudder. And it just kind of, it's even sprinting all out. I don't know, Jason and I had a lovely experience passing a team at the end of the Everglades Challenge. And we were absolutely full tilt sprinting after 300 miles or something like that. And our cadence did not change at all, right? It's just how much power do you put in the water when it's in the water? And there was a little bit of showmanship that was happening there. It was like, how can we go as fast as we can without looking like we're trying to go fast? But the fact that that's possible kind of tells you something about the mechanics.
Yeah.
So go back to the finding the ideal cadence, and then also what does the technique look like there when you're so you're slowing it down, you're focusing on the technique. So, if we were to look at the paddle stroke for people kind of listening in, let's say 0% is when the blade just touches the tip, or the blade touches the water. 50% is when it's equal to your hip. And then let's say 100% was if you went all the way back, like straight back, and it finally just pulled out. What does it look like for where you enter, release, kind of all that stuff?
Ooh, I'm going to see if our answers are the same. Okay, so you got that. 0% is at your foot or as far forward as you're reaching. 50% is at your hip, and then 100% is like back behind you. Ooh, this is
I
tense.
pull out at like 40, 45.
I'd say even 30. I'm not getting close to my hip. I'm starting my exit by my...
Wait, your hand is by your hip or your blade is by your hip?
I don't know. I was thinking blade. Or hand. Sorry, I was thinking hand, but I'm starting to exit.
Okay, well, give it in both.
If the blade is behind your hip, you're too far.
Yeah. I mean, I think of it as in when I'm paddling hard and really focusing, like Dan said, on those shorter strokes, I'm thinking about entering in front of my foot or around my foot, depending on the boat that I'm in. And I'm thinking about the power phase being done, and then by my knee,
so cleanup,
and the exit starting, the cleanup or the exit starting, so that my entire power phase, the pull part of my stroke, is from basically my ankle to my knee, which is way shorter than most people do it. But also, to Dan's point earlier, especially with a flat blade, like, you only care about moving that still water. And so the longer I go, even if I'm putting in power, like, I'm only moving water. So it gets less effective. It's like that 80-20. The first, that ankle to knee, even less than that ankle to like mid calf is the most important part that my blade is in and I'm generating power, right? After that, it's a diminishing return. And the further back I get, it gets even a negative return, right?
And then there's the other thing, which is which parts of your body generate force in which parts of the paddle stroke. So kind of shouldery, armsy generates power in the catch. And the lower abdominal rotation generates the power in the quote power phase. And so
the catch would be 0 to 15%?
0 to 10.
your paddle hasn't actually moved backwards yet. It's just getting in the water.
So once it starts to hit the water, that's kind of the transition phase into the... Okay.
Yeah, so the catch is between the tip of the paddle touches the water, and then the paddle is completely submerged in the water.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So that first part in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another easy thing for people to watch. This is a classic one when I'm paddling with new people, especially if I'm in the back and they're in the front. It's really easy to see this. We call it lily dipping. There's all kinds of, lily dipping can mean a lot of things, but this is where sleep deprivation comes into the effect. Dan and I still struggle with this. We'll remind each other all the time, because if your blade is not in the water, right, like you've missed out. And you'll watch a lot of people in videos paddling flat water with half of their blade or a third of their blade out of the water, right? So just means that they're contacting less water, right, and moving less water, so they will go less fast. And so as you get tired, that reminder amongst your team of make sure you bury the blade in the catch, is a very, very valuable thing. And even really good, we get lazy or our core gets tired or our shoulder. And so those things happen less and less the longer we paddle, unless we bring them back into our mind, right?
Well, I think the half blade insertion thing is a coping strategy for too high of cadence. So you overcome I'm struggling to get 45 to 50 paddle strokes a minute. I'll just put the paddle in less. And it's very natural. And you're like, oh, this feels okay. I can paddle at this cadence now. But then when I'm sitting behind you, burying the blade every single time, trying to follow your 38 cadence, there's just no way. I just need to actually pull the water at some point. And that's the thing with the high cadence, slow cadence thing is I want 32 great strokes per minute rather than 38 crappy strokes per minute. And that's just what happened in Worlds, is watching people paddle faster cadence with just, they're not putting the blade in, or they're not pulling on it very much.
So, Dan, what would be the key points of technique? Focus on these things and not as much these things.
And Dan, I love this question. So I want you to start with like 3 to 5 things that they should potentially seek out, coaching or training for, right? And then a different 3 to 5 things that are for somebody that listens to this on the way to their next race, and they're not willing to put in the training or don't have the time, but like, I'm in a race now.
Okay, love it. I'm sitting with you in the car going to a race. How do you have the best time possible? I think it's, make sure the blade is right side up and in the water completely, and use rotation of your torso instead of bending your arms to generate power. So it's really common to rotate, like to rotate in your shoulders or bend your elbows to try to move the paddle. And neither of those things is great. The best way to long-term generate power is to be rotating. And it literally is like, if you sit in a chair, it's just rotating your shoulders relative to your hips, right? It's like your hips are locked onto the chair that you're sitting on and you're looking over your shoulder. That's the rotation that I'm talking about, right? It's very tempting to kind of do a pitcher kind of move with your arm, like throwing a ball, right? Where the arm is rotating in the socket is a tempting thing that people do. And it's really just look over your shoulder. How far can you rotate your spine using your abdominal muscles? And I think those are the 3 like things that it doesn't actually take a coach to help you with, right? It's like, there's so many details. Like, there's a half a dozen drills that I do every time I paddle. And if I'm paddling with someone, they're more obvious and I'll talk to the person about them. And if I'm just paddling by myself, I do them kind of here and there as like more subtle reminders of like pulling in close to my body as opposed to pulling out from my body.
What would be your technique cues? So let's say you were with somebody and you're going to give them cues on the technique, right? What would some of those cues be? Or ways you explain it for them to understand?
I think the one that I come back to the most is, where do you feel sore? Where are you working? And if the answer is basically anything other than like the abdominal muscles around your belly button, it's the wrong answer, right? Like that's where all of the power comes from that actually moves the boat. All the other stuff, sprint paddling accepted, right? But in endurance paddling, if you feel it anywhere other than your lower abdominals, you're wasting power, energy, time, etc. And I think that people wind up using their shoulders, using their rotator cuff muscles, and a lot of kind of accessory tiny muscles to do stuff. And you're going to have a bad time long term, basically.
The way I heard it is, imagine you have a beach ball in between your chest and the paddle.
Yeah.
And you're twisting with your core in order to get the power as opposed to just using your arms.
Sure. I haven't seen that particular cue work very well personally,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't coached that many people.
I would cue people all the time to exit sooner. Like, it's almost never a bad idea to exit sooner, right? I'd rather than pull it back and say, actually, don't exit quite that soon. But our default habit patterns are almost always going to be, as a novice paddler or an intermediate paddler, or to exit too late, right? Because we feel like we want more power, and so we just exit late, right? And then slow the cadence, right? Like those 3 things, if I'm going to give somebody a high level thing, that you remember those 3 points. Now, Dan, I want you to say them because your voice is more commanding, okay?
Enter and exit early with the paddle right side up, facing the right way. Well, that was it pretty much, right?
Cadence.
Low cadence, yeah, right. And
Okay.
and at a
Slow cadence.
slower cadence than you probably expect.
And maybe if you're in a tandem, like make it look cool by synchronizing your paddle stroke, because there are actual physics benefits to it, but it also looks way cooler, and you don't bash paddles as much if you're with a kayak paddle, right? We don't need to get into the micro benefits of that, but there are some. So you might as well do it. Okay, now coaching, Dan. What are your 3 top? You're self-training yourself, right? Like you're going to say for the next 6 months, Dan and Nick and Jason's podcast is my guide to adventure race paddling. What should I be thinking about when I train?
You want to sit upright. So you want to have flexible enough hamstrings that you're not hunching. So you want like a nice stacked spine. You want to make sure that the rotation is coming from your lower core. You want to make sure that you're not using accessory muscles. So like if you're familiar with like dumbbell flies, where you like lean over and lift your hand with a weight up, that's the opposite of what you want to do, right?
In other words, if you're the Philadelphia Eagles mascot and you're bending over, flapping your wings, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that you want the power to come through straight arms from a rotation and not pulling your straight arms with your small accessory shoulder muscles, if that makes sense. A cue that has helped me a lot is to intentionally bring your arm close to center line. So by engaging your pec minor and bringing your shoulder in, you're actually just like preventing your small accessory muscles from swinging your paddle out. I think those are probably the 3 most common things. Paying attention to which muscles are sore and whether, like, if you feel twingy or pinchy in your shoulder, you're doing it wrong. Like, go talk to a PT, call somebody. Like, that's not what you want to feel. And many, many, many paddlers blow their shoulders because they're using teeny weeny muscles instead of big muscles. Or they've made muscles that are supposed to be teeny weeny into big muscles that then like are just totally out of whack.
And this is what often leads to the fatigue that makes people slow down in longer paddle things,
Yep.
right? Because they're
Yep.
generating decent power for that first hour, but then they're using poor form, and so those micro muscles, the accessory muscles, the rotators, they just wear out, and that's how they're paddling. Going back to what we talked, do these things, but also do them while generating metrics and learning paddling technique. Take your GPS watch out there, do repeatable efforts with small changes, right? And it's totally worth it to train endurance, do all that kind of stuff. I have a question about that in a second. But when you're doing these changes, if you don't have the metrics, because one of the unique things with paddling versus running and biking is the feeling of speed does not equal speed. And we'll do something and we'll feel like we're not going as fast, but the GPS isn't going to lie, right? So definitely take some metrics and you will unlock, even just being curious, you will unlock more efficient, lower heart rate, more effortless paddle strokes that actually equal the speed you're at currently or make it go up. And that's really what you're looking for, right? Another question, and this is for both you guys. Now, if you were going to choose 2 or 3 exercises, like dryland exercises, weight training things that would help prepare somebody for just, more intense paddle training or just, big paddle races, what are some simple things that would correlate to the kind of, connection and strength we want paddling?
I think it goes to the kind of your prime movers, which is going to be a lot of the core. So rotational strength work. So kind of like Russian twists, windshield wipers, cable twists, things like that.
What are like, I think I do a lot of wood choppers. I don't know if that's like a Russian twist where I'm like holding a cable and I'm rotated back one way with both arms and I'm basically just working core rotation through kind of extended limbs. But is that like a Russian twist?
Yeah, same thing, rotational thing, right? So for a Russian twist, you're typically seated on the ground, you have some kind of weight, have your heels on the ground, and then you twist your upper body side to side.
Oh, God,
Now,
yeah.
the key is that what a lot of people do wrong, and what a lot of athletes do wrong that I've, coached and the way I switched the training when I was working with all the NCAA teams, they just kind of keep their chest facing forward and they would just touch it on the ground with their arms. And that's similar to the paddling when you're doing it wrong, right? Whereas you keep that weight straight in front of your chest, and now you twist as far as you can in your range of motion.
Yeah. Awesome.
Left.
That would be a great exercise. I'm going to add that. Love it.
And then a windshield wiper, you're on your back, laying flat, and then you bring your feet straight up. So your legs are straight, your feet are straight. So the 90 degrees, your back to your butt is flat on the ground. And then from your butt to your heels is straight in the air. And then you move your legs side to side like windshield wiper, right? And so it's the same kind of rotation that you're doing. You can control it kind of in both directions a bit. And the other one's the exact cable rotation you were talking about. So you're grabbing a cable machine, you're twisting. The one thing about a nice thing about the cable machine is that you can twist in that, concentric motion, and you can do the eccentric coming back. And so doing that kind of works both the muscle and the tendon a little bit. So I would say those kind of core exercises are the main movers with the paddling. And then kind of the stabilizer muscles are going to be more your upper back, shoulder, things that are, let's say, you're not going to hold super tight, but if you were gripping tight, that would be like your forearm, things that are more isometric, that are just kind of holding rigid and supporting the motion, I think would be some of those other types of exercises you would do. Band pull aparts is an easy one, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
Dan, what do
great
you think?
I haven't found a dry land. I don't have a kayak erg way to simulate the twist. I'll try the exercise that you guys mentioned and see how they work for me. But the most important one for me is basically bent over dumbbell rows.
Yeah.
As dumb as that sounds, they kind of do two critical things. And the first one is they stretch out your hamstrings. Awesome. I need all the help I can get with that. I'm a desk job kind of guy. So I need all the help I can get keeping my hamstrings flexible. And that happens with the bent over row. And the other thing that it does is it keeps I have hypermobile shoulders. So if I don't properly engage my trapezius muscle during the bent over row, I get immediate pain in my shoulders. So if I have bad form in my bent over row to improperly engage my traps as I pull up, immediate feedback from all the rotator cuffs in my shoulders. And then continuing, like getting the actual lift out of them doesn't do much for the paddling, but making sure that the shoulder blades are engaged and locked in, either like allowing them to be extended and then really carefully retracting them, is the part that I personally struggle the most, or have struggled the most with in my paddling practice. And so that's the top tier exercise for me personally.
Yeah. And that's one that I've used a bunch too as well. I mean, it's more of like I actually really like the ones both you said, because, one, I think that rotation for me does help if I don't do some wood choppers, or now I'm going to try the Russian thing. I tend to fatigue there, but the bent over rows to help, because if I also am lifting too heavy and use poor weight, I'm doing rotation where I don't want it, right? Like there's a importance of being able to stabilize the core, right, while I do these single arm bent over rows or double arm, right? That goes a long way to understanding the connection between the shoulder blade, the trapezius scapula, that I want to be a foundation for my paddle stroke. So when I rotate, there's no movement there. And I had one more question that I just remembered that I want you to address. What's up with a feather? Like we've got all the really good training, but what's up with a feather? When do I use it? Should I change it? Does it matter? Like, because some people don't. Like, I see people paddling and I'm just like, you should feather your blade, or like, you don't really need to feather your blade because your angle of entry sucks because you're doing too much rotation. So tell me about feather.
There's a lot of talk of feather. Simply, feather is how out of alignment the two blades are. So you can have blades that are parallel to each other, that's a zero feather, where you look down the paddle and you just see them in the same orientation. And then you can have them 90 degrees offset, where they're completely, like, only one can be facing up at a time. And there are a lot of things that go into it. The only two that I care about are wind resistance and how it feels. Wind resistance matters mostly if there's a huge headwind or a huge tailwind, and you can kind of, like, obviously having a feathered blade means that the blade that's pushing back in the water isn't pushing against the air very much. And so if you have a headwind, that's good. And if you have a tailwind, that's, you're leaving a little bit of power on the table, maybe. And then the other thing is just feel. And depending on what angle your wrists are and where you put the blade in the water and how you twist and what the angle of the paddle relative to the water is, different feathering amounts will feel different. The easiest way is to just unlock your blade and see what feather angle it wants to be at. And that's a pretty good starting point, right? Like, because if you just don't lock your blade, it'll take whatever feather angle it wants. And, you know, that only works in a wing blade. That doesn't work with a flat blade, I don't think. No. But if you're like on flat water and there's no like weird wind stuff going on, let it ride and see where it wants to be, and then try that. And then try it 5 degrees on either side of that, and you'll figure out what feels good. It is my opinion. I'm sure there's a technically optimal number for every paddler and paddling condition, but I just wing it.
The other thing that I really like about it that people should consider when they're buying a paddle is, we talked flat versus wing, but there's a lot of benefits to a 4-piece paddle as well. And I know they're really popular in adventure racing, but we all really enjoy having 2-piece paddles, especially where our wings are concerned, because a stiffer paddle is wonderful. And the more joints you have in the paddle, like unless you're paying top dollar premium, it tends to have some flex in those joints. But, I think more important is to have a paddle that ideally is infinitely or close to infinitely featherable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And has some adjustment in length. Because as an adventure racer, you're going to end up using this awesome blade to paddle in a bunch of different boats, right? And and having some variation, even 15 centimeters of, 15 to 20 centimeters of width, because there's nothing worse than being in a boat where your paddle is ridiculously short compared to how far you have to reach to get it in the water, or ridiculously long. We've gone both sides. So getting something that has some variation in width, or length of the paddle, and then some featherability. Because the other great thing for really, really long races, it is just like we now see in dropper posts being awesome. We can micro change our saddle height and therefore our dynamics with overuse injuries. If we have a blade in these expedition races that we can feather, like in the Yukon 1000, I must have changed my feather not because of wind conditions, but just because I wanted a little more or less wrist rotation, or length, like a little bit, steeper angle or shallower angle. So I was making these adjustments every 4 or 5 hours just to basically have to be thinking about my paddle stroke more and giving me less overuse stuff. So, paddling is complex. And I think, it's been amazing to have Dan on here and just really, I think it's the most under thought about of the disciplines. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I agree. And it's also because it's very easy to hop outside with your shoes on and go for a run. And it's easy to hop on your bike and go ride. It's a lot harder to get out onto water and go paddle. Like you got to load a boat or blow up a pack raft. You got to drive to where the water is for most people. And with that, what are your guys' thoughts on cross training? So yesterday I was texting back and forth with Mary Chandler about some stuff, and I'm envisioning her up in, Michigan and the winter's coming in. How do people cross train when they can't get out there? What are your thoughts on that?
If you have an adventure racer in your family, or you're an adventure racer that your friends and family, loved ones, wife, husband is like, hey, what can I get you for Christmas or your birthday? Just say, all I want this year is a kayaking erg. That's all you need to say. Do I really want to spend $1,500 on this piece of fitness equipment? But if somebody's looking for something to buy you that loves you, wants to buy a kayaking erg, Darren used to have one that was kind of small. It wasn't the best, but it was really easy to put away. You can get bigger ones. There's plenty of cross training things, but a kayaking erg is like, it's the way that you're going to get better. Leading up to most of Dan and I's record attempts, we spent 98% of our time indoors on a kayaking erg and 2% of our time paddling together. We had a base together. We'd done some stuff, but for the amount of ultra distance paddling races that we have won and set records on together, probably, we've spent more time paddling in a physical boat on races, and outside of races, the time that we spent in a boat together is like 1% of our paddle training, 2%. So,
Okay, so if we're looking at a kayaker, right, they range from like $1,500 at the low end to like $6,000 at the high end. And then people build their own. So you see, online, you look around and people have all kinds of stuff where they're using, ropes with wooden things, and they usually convert other kind of rower pieces or skier pieces into it. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, have gone down all these rabbit holes. Can you kind of guide us in, like, where, if somebody's going to do it, what shouldn't they do? What should they look for? Those kind of things.
Get a kayak erg that has an erg that you can look at metrics on. You need something to measure what's working, right? There's no elite athlete that wants a bike trainer that has a manual resistance. Like, I'd use one if that was all I had and I was on vacation for a month. But without me knowing what my wattage numbers are, like, my workout is so much less effective. And for most of us, like, time is the most critical thing. So if I can put an hour on the kayaking erg or half an hour or 20 minutes and know what I'm doing and know that it's being effective, that's far better for me than just sitting. And this is the problem with paddle training too, is it's very easy to just say, I paddle trained today because I went out and paddled my boat for a while, right? But we don't tend to do that as athletes in running and cycling. We have goals for our training. But a lot of us adventure racers are like, oh, my paddle training is sitting in a boat and paddling. But we don't know what we're doing. And so that's why, getting a kayaking or getting something that has a measurable metrics, or when you are actually paddling, even when we take our kids out and paddle in the canoe, I'm looking at my Garmin watch. Like, we're paddling our kids across to the pizza shop at the lake that we share a cabin with, Dan. And I'm just like, ooh, now I'm thinking about my paddle stroke, and we just gained 5K an hour or 0.5K an hour. Like, so it's gathering information that's relevant. But yeah, I mean, I think
But I
paddler,
think,
like,
put simply, there is no such thing as cross training for paddling. Like running for a road cyclist, you will preserve some of your fitness. And cycling for a runner, you will preserve some of your fitness. This is not true for paddling in my experience.
surfing. If you're doing
Surfing,
long
okay, fair enough. I'll buy
surfing,
surfing, but I
yeah.
don't have a surfboard anymore. Um,
Swimming.
Swimming,
I don't think so.
I would say swimming for
Maybe.
sure. Cross
Yeah.
training, like, yeah,
Now, what about skimo or cross country skiing?
For maybe, because
but
you
yeah,
do,
Nick,
you're not
Matt,
wrong.
we can tell who the professional
Coming
athletic
through.
trainer is.
Yeah,
It's
coming
not.
through.
Yeah, no, I think all of those things that take some core and shoulder arm connection would be, but cycling and running is not it, right?
Climbing.
You're not going to increase your paddle fitness by doing either of those two.
Mm,
But skimo is
cross training,
probably
I could buy climbing.
yeah, I could buy climbing. That's good core shoulder connection. I mean, again, these things are cross training in the 5 to 10% range, right? It's not quite the same as, oh, I'm an ultra runner and I'm going to go do a long hike, right? Like, and that helps a lot, right? This is not that. But I think if it's winter and you're not getting as much time paddling as you want, the more you can do some of those activities, the easier it'll be to come back if you don't
I
have that
should try
kayak.
swimming. That's a
Swimming
smart
has a
thought.
lot of rotation, a lot of shoulder stability,
Yeah,
glide, and honestly, like,
and the water feel.
and more interesting to me is, like, I learned to swim and was a swimmer for forever, and then all of a sudden now the technique is so much more like paddling. It's all about glide, catch, like, not just like smashing through the water as fast as you can. So yeah, good call, Nick. Thanks for you know, thanks for keeping it
Learned
real.
something today. I love
Not
it.
everybody has to have a kayaking erg, even though you should go get a kayaking erg.
Yeah, and then I think one thing with metrics too you can do is, let's say you don't have a smartwatch, you can always set a distance that you paddle, and then just
Yeah,
time yourself on
for
like bump
sure.
sets, like you said,
Yeah,
is a
yeah,
simple way.
yeah. Exactly. And then, we'll I think at some point, Dan, I want to get you back maybe in, 6 months or something to go a little bit more into this. This is like the taste, because I'd love to get you to kind of give some racers a formula for in-race maximization of their paddling
Mm.
beyond what we've
Mhm.
done. Because we do a lot of that as a team, and sharing some of that information would be good. But this, I think, is a huge place to start. And for those of you listening, like, keep it simple. Like, do just a couple of these things, and even just starting to think about paddling, right? Is gonna help you have more fun, because what we see is people are always talking about how sleepy they get paddling, right? Come on, Nick. Do you get sleepy paddling on these long paddling stages?
Chip Dodd does though.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Calling out Chip. But
He falls asleep. Yeah.
the biggest thing, And I think Dan and I both talk about this. The biggest thing that changed as we became better paddlers is it's not as sleepy anymore because I mean, you can't get away with it forever, but it's more fascinating and we have more tools and techniques to focus on. So we've got teammates that we get on a long paddle and they fall asleep. And somehow, Dan and I can kind of keep talking and keep cueing each other and we're fascinated by what it feels like. And so it's been pretty remarkable. And Chelsea is now training hard for the Yukon 1000, where, can we say it on the podcast? Who are you guys going up against?
Can we say it?
This makes Chelsea nervous. Yeah.
Nathan and Sophie, let's go.
Nathan and Sophie of Team Avaya are coming back. They really want to break Dan and I's record, but now they not only have to break Dan and I's record, they also have to beat Dan and Chelsea in a live time. So even if you can't complain about the flows then, baby, right? Both get the same flows. So anyway, Chelsea's nervous, but she's training a lot, which is awesome. So she's turning into a paddle machine now. So we'll be able to watch that in June, right? Cool. Anything else to add, Dan?
Final words of wisdom.
Paddling is awesome. Go paddle.
If you haven't watched it, just go watch the first episode of the Eco Challenge where you will see Dan. They can end it before the end. Don't watch the whole first episode. Just watch the part where Dan is like crushing the paddle and nobody knows why we're in front because everybody expects the Kiwis to be in front. And then Bear Grylls pulls up next to us and is like, what are you guys doing? Why aren't you putting the sails up? And I think it was me or somebody's like, well, we're in first place. So our paddling seems to be working. Right. Right. And there's no wind. The other thing is like, they're asking us dumb questions like, why aren't you putting the sails up? We're like, because sails take wind and there is no wind. But yeah, anyway, this also led to the creation of 4-hour fuel. So you can stop it right when Dan exits the beach in first place, like 10 minutes ahead of the Kiwis. And then boom. And then you will be like, this guy knows what he's talking about paddling. So you can watch the rest of it if you want. Yeah, it's a good show. Cool.
And I would say, anybody listening, comment on any of the stuff you see with questions you have about paddling.
And if we said anything wrong, Dan said it wrong because Nick and I are not the experts here.